All right. Welcome. It's 9 minutes past 4 in the hot and humid city of Lagos. I'm Aogo Obo with the rest of the gang. I told you we'll be here.
Me? We don't do shaku maku on this program, so we just welcome you.
Elderly legal practitioner such as myself. Do I qualify as a gang?
Gosh, someone put that up there on social media. On where's the rest of the gang? So I just took it from him. All right, we're talking about the biggest stories in the world of politics and development. Big stories that happened this week, and we will begin with ideas, which stands for Integrity, Democracy, Ethics, and Accountability, where I will be looking at 16 days of activism against violence against women, which incidentally was the first day of the activism, which will run all the way to the 10th of December, which is the International Human Rights Day. So we are going to continue that discussion, which we began on Monday. Every day of the week, we've highlighted issues with respect to women development and rights issues. And then we'll do a beeline to the public square, where we'll be having discussions on the controversial social media bill. Bill's gone past second reading at the Senate, but then there's been outcry, fluid and loud. The reactions have been. Remember, on Twitter you can connect with us on any of these handles at Ideas Radio NG, at Nigeria Info FM, at Rotimi Sankore, at Obo, and at Ninja Ma. Also send us messages on WhatsApp 0809-597-5805, and I promise we will take them. So over to Ideas with IOB.
Hello, Agogo, and it's great to be back after an absence last week.
Yes. Welcome back to both of you.
Yes. I, in fact, Rotimi, we're going to be looking at the issue of the ideas component when we think about activism against violence against women. And I'm actually a little bit stirred by it on this subject, because there was a tweet on my Twitter feed of a confrontation between an very much aggrieved consumer of electricity and representatives of an electricity company in Lagos. And one of the representatives of the electricity company was a woman, and she was holding a wire and or some cable, and the aggrieved consumer was also holding the cable, and they were sort of dragging it. And the man was obviously, I would say he was at breaking point. But at the point of his, as part of his reaction, he started stripping himself, and then he threatened to rape the representative of the electricity company. At which point, of course, she let go of the cable, and there was a lot of comment about it on social media. But so I commented that neither side covered themselves in glory, but that I was really disturbed that so many people found the threat of rape a matter for laughter, and for sort of joking and saying, saying to the man that
not a funny matter at all.
No, because I sort of felt that the issue went beyond who was in the right and who was in the wrong, because the impact would be that if that was a legitimate response to an argument that a man was having with a woman, then a woman who was going about her job and doing her duty should expect to be subjected to such a threat, at which point she would now draw in. And with so many of these things, and it will come up in your discussion on the social media bill too, that the real danger is that people now start to adjust their behavior to deprive themselves of rights which they're entitled to enjoy, because they fear that something might happen, instead of insisting on their rights and possibly having to pay a penalty for demanding or insisting on their rights. You find that instead they end up saying, well, I better not, I will just not do this, I will not put myself forward. And I think it's in that context that I think that we tend to make a bit light of the issues of violence against women. And this is reflected in the way that our law enforcement agencies respond when there are issues of violence against women. And that was why I felt that it is a matter of accountability, not just of the law enforcement agencies, but I think also that this is probably one of those occasions when we ourselves need to think about what kind of ethos or mindset do we create in society that makes it feel
the matter of the law enforcement agents
absolutely, yes,
not being held accountable.
Well, they don't even consider themselves accountable for the security and safety of women in protecting them against violence. I mean,
that is for their lack of action.
yes, I mean, let me say that it is quite some years now since I chaired the civil society panel on police reform. And one of the issues that we looked at was, why is there so little public confidence in the Nigeria police force? And one of the things that came out very strongly was that women in particular had little confidence in the police, both because they faced ridicule, victimization, or being victims. They faced accusations of putting themselves in the way of harm, victim blaming, and in some really egregious cases where minors had been taken by their parents to report sexual assault, and being sort of lined up by the police and or made to stand in front of a panel of seated
treated
police.
like a suspect.
Well, I mean, before you even get to that, just being told, well, didn't you enjoy it? Or if you are a person with disabilities, you don't get the offence against you is not treated as something for which the police are accountable.
I've even seen women that were beaten up at home, being asked by police, "What did you do to provoke him?"
Yes, again, it's always this idea that the victim has to explain herself. And I think that if we're talking about accountability matters, then the police has to understand that it is accountable for the safety and security of every citizen in the country who presents themselves as a victim. And that rather than put the victim through a, how do I put it, a barrage of skepticism and ridicule, and even taunting, really, that the police has to step up, because in the long run, if we move away from the concept of policing as something done for the protection and preservation in power of those in power, to the protection of the citizens in the country, then we will understand that the police has to be accountable to us and not to those in power.
We were talking about this on Monday morning, and two issues came up. One is the low numbers of women in the police, the lack of human rights training for the police overall, and especially the men, and also not enough women magistrates and judges. As a lawyer, how do you think the low numbers of women in the police?
I mean, we should just look at the issue of women in the criminal justice system, whether it's police, whether it's magistrates and judges. Although I do think that Lagos, I'm not so familiar with the magistrates court, but there are a significant number of magistrates who are women in Lagos State. But I think that it goes beyond numbers. When I was on the Police Service Commission, there were attempts to recruit women, and in particular to establish a mobile women, to have women in the mobile police, because there were no women in the mobile police. And I was not the women's representative on the commission, but the person who was there to represent women was particularly active in this matter. Princess Nana, she's now late. but she was particularly active in getting the IGP to understand that women need to be at every, in every, there should be no section of the policing that is closed to them. However, and we in the civil society panel, we also recommended that the Nigeria, that where women suspects are arrested, if they cannot be interrogated or questioned if there are no police women in that police station, then they should be taken to a police station where there are women. Now, in fact, I should say that that last Friday when I was coming back late from the University of Ibadan, it was one of the things that I had gone to talk about, which was the violence against commercial sex workers. But I think it's important for us to also be aware that simply having women in the police is not the alpha and omega of the story.
Hence the call also for better or improved training on human rights.
Yes, because the women themselves are often, just like their male counterparts, they're subjected to a process of dehumanization, breaking down and building up into the character that those in charge of the police want you to be. And what those in charge of the police want police officers to be is not necessarily sympathetic hearing ears to members of the Nigerian public who have grievances or complaints to make. So that you often find that the women themselves in the police force can be subjected to brutality and other forms of sexual harassment, which makes them...
Even overall structural discrimination against them.
Yes.
Because as you know, you can't join the police if you're a woman and you are married.
Yes, well, I mean, it's one of those things that the long-delayed amendment of the 1948, yes, before your time, even before my time, if I may say so, the long-delayed amendment of the 1948 Colonial Police Act is where it says that women cannot be married, they have to have the permission of the Inspector General.
That is, if you are a single policewoman and you want to get married.
Yes. There's no similar provision.
There's no similar provision for men.
Yes.
But you can't even join if you are married already.
I mean, so the point is that these
and that discourages a large number of women from joining.
The point is that discrimination, of course, it's unconstitutional. And it ought to be struck down in any event. And in fact, the police no longer, because one would say that a male police officer is more likely to marry 3 of the criminals than but because it comes with the mindset of the woman cannot think for herself and will do whatever her husband tells her. And that's why she needs permission or that. But if you're saying that a spouse should be vetted by the superior officer, then all spouses, whether they are male or female, should be vetted. So I thought that I should mention that because I think that there's this idea that accountability only talks about money or things like that. But I think that because we keep on coming back, and it's one of the things that we mentioned in Bring Back Our Girls too, that the security of the citizen is part of what government is set up to be and what they have to account to us for.
So accountability for your role as a public servant.
As a public servant.
Including in law enforcement.
In charge of security. You see, law enforcement, we use the term law enforcement, but actually what they are supposed to be there for is to guarantee our security. It's the whole reason why nations are formed, why we have governments, to provide security for citizens. Now that does include enforcement of the law, but we also have to provide the general environment of security. And as long as you don't have a police service or a police force which thinks that everybody is entitled to security, then you have that problem. I should say that one of the things that came up during the conference that I went to when I was away last week was that the idea of policing as something for the benefit of citizens is a fairly recent idea. That mostly policing, fighting of wars and so on is all about those in power and their safety and security.
That was the defense of the state and
the defense of the state did not necessarily mean the defense of the citizens within the state. I mean, they could be sacrificed or cannon fodder or whatever. So we really have to get past that.
Lastly, before we go,
Yeah.
what do you think can be done to improve this situation of lack of accountability with regards to protection of women?
Well, I think that the basic thing is that there has to be greatly improved training for the police, and that, I mean, you know, when I was in the Civil Liberties Organization, we were trying to do human rights training with the Nigeria police. But I think that we seem to be, in a way, going backwards on the issue of the police conceiving of their duty as something that should encompass the security and safety of all. But definitely training. Yes, increased numbers of women in the police service, because, you know, in numbers, then there's safety in numbers, that they will be able to resist the idea that they should become these mental automatons who look on with this lack of concern when other women or even children are being subjected to abuse at the hands of their fellow officers. Rotimi, I must, before we close, I need to say that we were going to talk about the Gender Equalities Opportunities Bill. I would just want to say that, because one of the I in ideas stands for integrity. And I do think that 25 years after Nigeria signed up to the Convention against the elimination of all forms of discrimination against women, and we signed up to it, that it's a matter of integrity for the country to enact legislation that will actualize that elimination of discrimination against women. And so far we haven't. That GEO bill, as it's called, has been brought forward. This is not the first time it's being brought forward.
And it was introduced again just 2 days ago.
And the Nigerian Senate does not seem to understand that this is an undertaking that Nigeria gave to the international community, that these are the sorts of things that we respect in our country, and we are not respecting them. And I think that that legislation would raise our integrity quotient, because we would now at last be seen to be doing what we promised to do. So I want to thank you.
Thank you.
It's great to be back. Please
Thank you so
be
much.
sure to tune in to us next week. We hope to have an important guest on the show.
Thank you so much, Ayo. Great to have you back.
All right, so we do a beeline to Public Square right after.